So what did Donald Trump accomplish to sit there and clap like a seal, roll out the red carpet, have planes flying overhead, and basically put on a Super Bowl halftime show for this mass murdering, genocidal lunatic and international pariah in Vladimir Putin? Well, basically nothing. Despite what you've heard out of the White House and on various corners of the internet over the last several days, we've got nothing but this. Basically, Sergei Lavrov coming on TV and blowing up any idea that there's a deal on the table Ukraine could ever possibly accept. Now, like I said, a lot of noise, a lot of things going on, a lot of confusion, and obviously not helped by the fact that you have a complete idiot in Steve Witkoff who confuses what Russia is talking about left and right. Perhaps it's because he's using an interpreter from the Kremlin again, which we know he did before and is just an unbelievable mistake. So I want to talk about this article from Reuters today that cuts through that and kind of identifies what exactly Russia has on the table. And spoiler alert, it's the same thing the Russians have always been offering. A deal that they know that Ukraine cannot accept, that would be suicidal for its existence, and which is actually intended, one, as an insult, and two, to make sure no peace deal is actually reached because Russia cannot afford to reach peace. They are dead set on trying to conquer all of Ukraine. And this is not only because the wartime economy is set up for that and it will collapse if they actually reach a peace agreement, but also because the ideology of Vladimir Putin and his entire government depends upon fulfilling this myth that, Ukraine needs to be denazified and that Ukraine has an illegitimate government and that it is a threat to Russia's further existence. So let's talk about this article and look at there's basically two components: land, territory, and everything else. So, is there going to be a land swap? Absolutely not. There's not going to be a land swap. What you're going to have, if you agree with this deal, is Ukraine giving up the Donbass, including the fortified cities of Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and Konstantinivka, and getting nothing in return. Why does that matter? Well, first of all, it's not equitable in any way whatsoever. But for tactical reasons, it's critical. Those cities are called fortress cities because they're part of a defensive belt that has been built since 2014. Millions of dollars, millions of man hours, and the terrain there is ideal for setting up a defense. Not only in those cities, but behind them. You've got lines, trenches, all of those things, defense in depth. If you give that up, Russia occupies it, and then the territory after that has no defenses built. And the rest of the country is wide open for an invasion. Additionally, those cities have a deep emotional connection with the Ukrainian people and especially with the military. I lived in Kramatorsk for a while. I think a lot of people in the military, I'd be surprised if it's not more than 50, 60, 70, 80% at some point did not spend time in those cities going through those areas as part of their, service in the Ukrainian armed forces. And so this is like America giving up, LA, New York. One American who fights with Ukrainian armed forces was interviewed, and I think this is accurate, like voluntarily giving up the Alamo without a fight. Not going to happen. So you've got that for the land swap. What about the other conditions? Well, let's talk about security guarantees, because this just proves Russia doesn't care about reaching peace. They want to fight. Russia says the only security guarantee they will agree to is no foreign troops, no NATO troops, no Europeans, that Russia is going to put its own troops in Ukraine to defend against itself. Let me say that again. Russia, the genocidal invader who has raped, pillaged, and murdered its way across that country, and which bombs civilians every single night with hundreds of drones, ballistic missiles, and other munitions, says that it will be responsible for the security of Ukraine by itself. Okay? That doesn't make any sense, and that's completely unacceptable. Not only that, Ukraine, according to Russia, must be neutral, meaning it basically can't have an army capable of defending itself. So you give up the terrain around in the Donbass that Ukraine needs to defend itself. You have your army completely eviscerated and being too small to defend against any Russian invasion. And then there's no actual force there that's capable of defending Ukraine. What does that tell you? It's a simple equation. It is the elimination of Ukraine as a state, as a people, as a government. Again, the same pattern over centuries where Russia tries to destroy the very identity of the Ukrainian people. So that's where we're at. Well, what about the meetings between this bilateral and trilateral meeting that Donald Trump has talked about, because that's was in his True Social post. It's something he really championed and put out there on the internet. Well, Vladimir Putin is not going to meet with Zelensky because that would legitimize Zelensky. That has been made clear today and in previous days from the Russians. So it's not going to happen. What about the $100 billion that Ukraine is supposed to receive in American weapons paid for by the Europeans? That's not going to happen either, because if you listen to the actual way that was phrased, the way it was structured, Ukraine would receive that $100 billion in U.S. weapons only after there was a peace deal with Russia. So Russia has a veto power over that happening by just not signing a peace deal. So this is where you're at. It is completely unworkable. It is insulting and is intended to not be a peace, because they don't want peace. They want to fight. So let's look at this map from the Institute of the Study of War. And what you see there is not only terrain-wise and geographically, giving up the Donbass is suicidal, especially when you combine it with having no army, having no foreigners there, having Russia be the defensive, the force providing security guarantees. But there's a lot of people who live there, and you'd be sentencing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to live under the dark midnight of occupation. And we know that that involves rape, torture, murder, abuse, not having drinking water, not having basic services. And there's no way that Ukraine will agree to that. And there's no way that the parliament, their Verkhovna Rada or their parliament legislature will agree to that. There's no way the people will stand for it. So moving on, I just want you to see this New York Times headline. Russia demands role in guaranteeing Ukraine's post-war security. And I wanted to show this to you because I wonder how long it took to write that, to make sense of the whole concept of the invader defending against itself as part of a security guarantee. They did a pretty good job. Russia demands role in guaranteeing Ukraine's post-war security. I mean, European and Ukrainian officials call the idea ludicrous. Well, of course, it is ludicrous. It's insane, and it's intended to be that. So there's one more thing in this war that functions like clockwork. You can set your watch by it. And that is that Donald Trump will be humiliated and slapped around by Vladimir Putin, figuratively speaking. It happened again this morning when, after Donald Trump said that he thought Vladimir Putin wanted peace, he believed in that, you had this. This is a joint Ukrainian-American electronics factory, and I'm going to show you where it is. And it was hit with ballistic missiles or cruise missiles. I'm not sure which one, but precision munitions. 600 people barely got out. 15 people are still critically wounded. Had they not escaped from that, there would have been hundreds of dead. Look at this. This is an American-Ukrainian joint business. As I said, there's an American flag flying in front of it. This is intended to send a message, and this is intended to be a slap in the face. Because look where it's located. It is all the way out in the western part of the country, nearly on the border with Poland and other countries. Look at the other cities that have actually been attacked with frequency by Russia. Kyiv in the north, Odessa in the south, Dnipro and Kharkiv out east and in the northeast of the country. So that geographic position, the fact there's really nothing else around there as far as strategic targets or military industry or anything like that, proves it's a challenge to Donald Trump, and he will absolutely fail. Every time Donald Trump sets red lines, they get steamrolled by the Russians. Donald Trump had an entire structure that he was going to, he was going to impose sanctions, he's going to impose tariffs, and do other things if, in fact, Russia did not agree to a ceasefire. He said flying up to Alaska on Air Force One, if he didn't get a ceasefire, it would be a total failure. He gets none of that. He gets, the Russian stubbornness, absurdity, and same offer for the entire and complete destruction of Ukraine that they've been making since they first invaded that country, and he calls it a 10 out of 10 success. This is what we're dealing with. Russia knows that Donald Trump will just lie. He's weak. He's a coward. And there's another thing you need to understand as to why Trump is completely incapable of having any forcing Russia to the table. Number one, not only are they incapable and they cannot, for a lot of reasons we've discussed, sign a peace deal, but Donald Trump does not even value the rules-based international order. He doesn't value the sovereignty of nations. He's never talked about it. And think about that, how amazing that is. He's never said, after World War II, we've reached this deal where countries don't invade each other by force. That is not a European concept. That is an American concept. It came out of the Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg principles state that the number one highest, umbrella for the thing that overarches everything In international law is wars of aggression are the worst things because that's what sets the conditions for war crimes to happen. That's when you have genocide. That's when you have civilians getting bombed. That's when you have, ethnic cleansing. And the fact that this doctrine we created, which is the framework for all civilized people, Donald Trump hasn't even talked about. Of course, he's not going to be able to force anybody to the table because nothing matters to him other than having a stupid video and trying to get a Nobel Peace Prize, which he's a million miles from ever getting, not in his wildest dreams. So that's where we're at. What does this mean? Well, I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound daunting, but it's actually inspirational, audacious, and there's a big silver lining. Trump will never get the Russians to the table. The Russians have no interest in coming to the table. It means that Ukraine is going to have to defeat Russia's military on the battlefield completely in order to ensure its survival. Now, while that sounds daunting, understand it is the only way that Ukraine can liberate all of its occupied territories, including Crimea. So I believe in Ukraine. It sounds like a big task. A lot of people say, oh, there's no way they can do this. But if they keep hitting strategic targets all across Russia, if they keep destroying their petroleum industry, there could be structural collapses. Time will tell, but their economy is teetering. And the big thing that Russia is counting on is that Ukraine will give up and that the West will stop supporting him. But Donald Trump, I believe, will still keep selling weapons to Europe to give to Ukraine. And Europe looks like it is starting to step up based upon what happened on Monday. So I believe in Ukraine. This is a different way to look at it. Give up and get it out of your head that Donald Trump will ever help there be a peace before Russia is defeated. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day. We'll see as things develop. Come to my channel, like, subscribe, and we'll keep it going. Take care.